question is about, he thinks, is unfair that some people don't buy insurance, and therefore we ought to make them buy insurance. He thinks that's unfair. And we had a year-long, virtually, argument and debate in this Congress, and Senator Durbin prevailed by a single vote before Senator Brown could be confirmed to kill the health care bill. They were able to pass it through with the interim senator by a single vote in the House and in the Senate, and it passed. But that's not what we're talking about today. That's not what Senator Cornyn and others have been talking about today. The point today is, should the Supreme Court of the United States decide this question as a matter of law and principle? Or should they divine what they think the people want? Although polls show the American people consistently oppose this legislation, never supported it, ever. But it was rammed through anyway. So they want to say, well, this is important, we think it's unfair, even though the polling data show, and the Supreme Court should have ratified. And they shouldn't worry about a little thing like the Constitution and limited powers. So that's what I want to be talking about today. I want to affirm the duty of the Supreme Court of the United States. And that duty is to fairly and objectively interpret the Constitution and to render justice, not based on polling data and not based on congressional desires. So American people polling data do think it's an impermissible, unconstitutional regulation. So it's difficult for me to say this is such a matter that the Supreme Court has got to acknowledge a minority view and approve it even if the Constitution doesn't agree. I don't think that's an argument that can be sustained in my view. So there has been, since the oral arguments in the case, I sense, and a lot of my colleagues share this view, that the President himself, Democrat colleagues in the House and the Senate, their friends in the media, and liberal government pro-health care advocates have stepped up undignified, not justified attacks on the court, which seems to me to be an effort, pretty transparent, to try to influence the outcome of that independent branch of government. And it also seems to me an attempt, since I've been a student of this for some time now, to lay the groundwork, to declare that the Supreme Court is somehow illegitimate if they don't render a verdict like my colleagues think should be rendered. I would just say parenthetically that whereas 2 years ago when this bill passed, 60-40, took 60 votes to pass it, it wouldn't pass today, wouldn't be close to having 60 votes today, because the American people spoke in 2007 and sent home a lot of people who voted for this bill when they didn't want them voting for it. And that was a big deal in the election, frankly, if you want to talk about that. So this philosophy that we here advocated is a dangerous philosophy of law and jurisprudence. It's results-oriented. It's political, not law, and it surely is contrary to the great heritage of law that this country has been so blessed with. So it may be that my colleagues are concerned because when pressed by the justices of the United States in oral argument, the Solicitor General of the United States seemed to be utterly incapable of identifying any limiting principle on government power. The Solicitor General proffered various reasons why health care is unique but not one of them was effectively grounded on any constitutional text, principle, or theory, at least in my way of thinking. People can disagree. The judges will have the final word on it. The non-legal argument that the court should not overturn a popular law suggested by many is, of course, irrelevant, not only because this health care law is, in fact, unpopular, but because popularity does not translate into constitutionality. Of course, under the popularity theory, it'd be wrong for the court to strike down the Defense of Marriage Act, which the administration has decided is unconstitutional and refuses to defend in court, even though the law was so popular it passed Congress 342 to 67 in the House and 85 to 14 in the Senate. So making the popularity argument reveals the lack of legal argument. It condemns such advocates as advocates against law, not for law. So the health care law supporters have disdainfully and consistently dismissed the notion, and it was done during the debate, that the legislation raised serious constitutional questions. I remember the debate in the Senate. This disdain was no more starkly demonstrated than when a reporter asked then Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, what the constitutional basis was for the statute. And she condescendingly replied, "Are you serious?" Is that time up?
Time has expired. Senator's time has expired.
I would, if the majority lead, I would certainly, my time's up and I would yield. I just would ask how long he might expect to be and if it would be possible to have consent to speak an additional 5 minutes after the senator completes.
Now, Senator Alabama will be recognized for another 5 minutes.
Without objection, so ordered. The senator from Alabama is recognized for 5 minutes.
I know the majority leader is extremely busy, and I appreciate his courtesy and respect the difficult duty he has here. So she said, are you serious? Well, when the Solicitor General of the United States was being grilled by the justices of the United States, I got to tell you, it looked serious then. It's axiomatic that the Commerce Clause, which is the one clause that would give power to the government to take over health care, was never understood to give unlimited power to the federal government. The federal government, without doubt, is a government of limited powers. It certainly never meant that Congress could regulate non-commerce under the power to regulate commerce. You can't regulate non-commerce when the only power the federal government is given is the power to regulate commerce. Give me a break. As Judge Roger Vinson, a distinguished judge, stated in his opinion in the case in which he struck this bill down, he said, quote, "It would be a radical departure from existing case law to hold that Congress can regulate inactivity under the Commerce Clause. It has the power to compel an otherwise passive individual into a commercial transaction with a third party by asserting, as it has done in this act, that compelling the actual transaction itself is a commercial and economic event and substantially affects interstate commerce. It is not hyperbolizing to suggest that Congress could do almost anything it wanted. If Congress can penalize a passive individual for failing to engage in commerce, the enumeration of powers in the Constitution would have been in vain, for it would be difficult to perceive any limitation on federal power, and we would have a Constitution in name only. Surely this is not what the Founding Fathers could have intended." Close quote. It's a serious question. The Supreme Court needs to do it, and they don't need to have Congress trying to pressure them one way or the other. So, Mr. President, that the President of the United States, President Obama, might think this is unprecedented or, his words, or extraordinary for the court to strike down a clearly unconstitutional statute, but is not. Supreme Court has a duty under the Constitution, under the powers of the judiciary, to speak clearly if Congress passes a law that violates the Constitution, that assumes powers Congress does not have, that attempts to act in ways on behalf of the federal government that the Constitution never gave the government the power to do. They have a duty to strike it down. So the court's reputation would be damaged if it bows to political bullying, but it won't be damaged if it follows the Constitution. And I think it's wrong to disparage and threaten the court during the pendency of a case in order to influence the outcome. I don't have any problem with criticizing a court decision if I disagree with it, but to try to congressionally or politically pressure a court, I think, is wrong for us. So these are important questions of law. I have an opinion, but the court has a duty. That duty is to decide the case before them impartially as a neutral umpire without counting the crowd noise. I believe they'll do their duty, and we all await the outcome. I thank the chair, I thank the majority leader, and would yield the floor.
Majority Leader is recognized.
I have 6 unanimous consent requests that have been cleared by me and the Minority Leader. I ask consent they be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, the last Congress was the most productive in the history of the country. Some say not the most productive. Certainly no one disagrees. The most productive since Franklin Roosevelt was president during his first term. But with this new majority in the House, this Congress has been altogether different, and that is an understatement. Consistently, this Congress has taken weeks or months to pass even simple, common-sense legislation, proposals that would previously have passed in minutes. The Senate has wasted literally months considering bipartisan bills, only to have those bills smothered to death under piles of non-relevant Republican amendments. And congressional Republicans have held even the most important jobs measures hostage to extract votes on unrelated ideological amendments, despite the Minority Leader's own call to, quote, stop all the show votes, end of quote. Those were his words. Mr. President, Democrats and American people have endured this blatant obstruction all year. In fact, for 18 months. What is this we're talking about, obstruction? If you look in the dictionary, it says it all. I did that this morning. The dictionary says that obstruction is a condition of being clogged or blocked. Now, doesn't that define what's happened here in this wonderful body we call the United States Senate? Republicans have clogged or blocked everything we've tried to do, even things, Mr. President, they've agreed on. And yesterday we read that we'll have to endure it every day for the rest of the year, every day for the rest of this Congress. And this came from Congressman Cantor, the #2 person in the Republican-dominated House of Representatives. House Republican leaders admit they've given up on actually running the country. Despite the work that remains to keep our country on the right track and continued 27 months of private sector job growth, they say they're done legislating for the year, in spite of the fact that the President working to create 4.3 million private sector jobs. But listen to this report from the political publication Political yesterday, and I quote, Serious legislation is all but done until after the election. The rest of this year, Cantor said, will be likely about sending signals, end of quote. Let's try that again, because it's really hard to comprehend that someone who's supposedly running the other body would say such a thing, but he did. Serious legislation is all but done until after the election. The rest of this year, Cantor said, will likely be about sending signals. So, Mr. President, rather than work with Democrats to strengthen our economy and create jobs, congressional Republicans will put on a show designed to demonstrate the extreme ideological direction in which they would lead this country. Majority Leader Cantor's candor is frightening. He said out loud what practically every Republican on Capitol Hill has been thinking all along. They care more about winning elections than creating jobs. But you don't usually hear them say so in public where reporters are listening. Just a short month ago, Speaker Boehner urged Congress, and I quote, to roll up your sleeves and get to work, end quote. To an audience of conservatives, the Speaker said, we can't wait, that's a quote, until after the election to legislate. And less than a week after he said that, Leader McConnell urged us to, quote, stop the show votes that are designed to fail. Let's stop the blame game. Let's come together and do what the American people expect us to do. Mr. President, the statements of Speaker Boehner and Leader McConnell are Orwellian. They do exactly the opposite of what they say. Republican Senator Olympia Snowe, by all means a moderate senator, who's retiring amid frustration over increasing partisanship in Washington, wrote to me in April to urge quick Senate action on many of the challenging issues facing us. It was a letter crying out for help, but not help from us, not help from Democrats. She was speaking to the Republicans. She knew that they were holding up virtually everything we were trying to do. And I'm sure that's one reason that this fine woman is leaving the Senate. Leader Cantor's remarks provide a window into the true Republican agenda. It seems when congressional Republicans forget the world is watching, they say what they really mean. They're more interested in putting on a partisan sideshow than in solving the real problems facing this nation. But, Mr. President, in truth, this comes as no surprise. It's just more of the same. Republicans have launched a series of attacks on access to health care for women, even contraception, and filibustered legislation to ensure American women pay equal pay for equal work. Now, in my desk here, Mr. President, I haven't used this in a while, but I knew it was here all the time. Filibuster. Filibuster, 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 filibuster. That's what obstruction's all about. Filibuster. From the dictionary. One of a class of piratical adventurers who pillaged the Spanish colonies in the West Indies during the 17th century. One who engages in unauthorized and irregular warfare against foreign states. A pirate craft. Now, it's also defined to obstruct progress in legislative assembly, to practice obstruction. And that's, Mr. President, what they've done. They've filibustered legislation to ensure American women get equal pay for equal work. Who could be against that? The American people, you take a poll, no one's against it. Republicans aren't against it, except Republicans in the Congress of the United States. They've stopped us from restoring fairness to the tax code to ensure billionaires don't pay a lower tax than middle-class families. They've put women at risk by holding the Violence Against Women Act in limbo. They blocked the bill to hire more teachers, cops, firefighters, first responders. They stalled important jobs measures, like the aviation bills. We had 22 short-term extensions of that. Finally, they shut down the government on one occasion. The government, as it relates to the Federal Aviation Administration, putting tens of thousands of people out of work. They've stalled for months and months work done on a bipartisan basis by two fine senators, Senator Boxer, the chairman of that committee, Senator Inhofe, the ranking member. Doesn't matter. They're stalling the highway bill. Millions of jobs. We can't get it done. For months, congressional Republicans have actively worked against any piece of legislation that might create jobs or spur economic growth. And you don't need to take my word for it. Just look at their record. Democrats have known all along that congressional Republicans' #1 goal isn't to improve the economy or create jobs. It's to defeat President Obama. And people say, oh, come on. You don't really mean that, do you? I mean every word of it. Here's why. Because the leader of the Republicans in the Senate said it. I didn't make it up. The minority leader, senior senator from Kentucky, said so plainly in another one of those moments of candor. He said, the single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. He said that in October 2010 when this country was mired in monumental challenges. Rather than saying, let's work together to do some things. How many jobs could we have created if we had had some semblance of help from the Republicans in Congress? Not 4.3 million jobs. Remember, 8 or 10 million were lost in the Bush administration. We've struggled to get some of them back. We could have created millions of more jobs just with a little help. But here's where they're headed, Mr. President. They're headed in doing everything they can, no matter what it takes, to try to make President Obama a one-term president. Mr. President, we're fighting back from the greatest recession since the Great Depression. Yet Republicans' top priority hasn't been to create jobs. Their top priority wasn't to help business grow and have people hire workers. It wasn't to train the next generation of skilled employees, to hire more cops or firefighters or put construction crews back to work, building those roads and bridges we need. Mr. President, we have 70,000, not 7,000, 70,000 bridges that are in trouble in this country. They need help. We have a bridge in Reno, Nevada, that they won't have the kids be in the school bus. They take them out, drive the bus over, and have the kids walk across the bridge. That's not the only place. It's all over the country that's happening. But we're getting no help. No, that wasn't their top priority, to help create these construction jobs. It was drag down the economy in hopes of defeating President Obama. And thanks, Mr. President, to Leader Cantor's candor, today we know Republican priorities hasn't changed one single bit.
Mr. President,
The system majority leader is recognized.
I want to thank the majority leader for that statement, and he comes to the floor with the other members of the leadership team to really call attention of to the nation. A statement made yesterday by the majority leader of the House Republicans, Eric Cantor of Virginia. Many people will remember, Mr. Majority Leader, that it was Eric Cantor who was appointed to the Deficit Task Force that the President created, chaired by Vice President Joe Biden, a bipartisan effort to try to deal with the deficit. And people will remember that there came a moment after several weeks when Mr. Cantor stood up and said, I'm leaving, and walked out, literally walked out of this highest level negotiation on deficit reduction. Said, I want no part of it. Well, we've got another walkaway here. Eric Cantor, the majority leader in the House, has announced that we're finished for business this year. There's nothing more we're going to do. We're going to politic and campaign and posture. To him, I guess that's an important responsibility. But to the rest of America, it is an abdication of responsibility. An abdication of responsibility. This morning, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, appeared before the Joint Economic Committee, and they wanted to talk to him about what more could be done by the Federal Reserve in monetary policy dealing with interest rates to get the economy moving forward. It's a legitimate policy question. But if Mr. Bernanke could have turned the tables for a moment, he might have asked the members of Congress, well, what are you doing to get the economy moving forward? I think that's a reasonable question. Let me suggest to Mr. Cantor, who thinks we're finished for business this year, that there are many elements of outstanding business that can help create jobs in America. And let's start with the first one, the transportation bill. The transportation bill will create 2.8 million jobs in America. What kind of jobs? As the Majority Leader said, to repair bridges and highways, to build our airports, to make sure America has a safe infrastructure to build our economy on. Well, in the Senate, we came to an agreement. Senator Barbara Boxer, as chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee, as well as Senator Jim Inhofe, the ranking Republican member from Oklahoma, reached an agreement, brought a bill to the floor. We went through the long process of amendments, and it passed. I think the final roll call was 74 to 22. It was an overwhelming bipartisan vote that extended for 2 years highway construction in America and created 2.8 million jobs. Well, obviously, that's something that's good for America. The question that should be asked is, well, where was the House transportation bill? And the honest answer is they never produced one, never. They couldn't agree on a bill. The House Republicans failed to pass a transportation bill. Ultimately, they passed a measure to extend the current Highway Trust Fund and the taxes that are collected to July 1st, just a few weeks from now. And then the Majority Leader appointed a conference committee. I'm honored to be on that committee with a number of my colleagues. I can't tell you how hard Senator Boxer and Senator Inhofe have worked on that committee. This bipartisan effort, a Democrat and Republican, has resulted in a compromise bill which they personally hand-delivered to the Speaker of the House, John Boehner of Ohio, this week. They understand we have a July 1st deadline. They understand the urgency to take it up and move it to create and keep 2.8 million jobs in America. What was the response of Speaker Boehner? Well, it was warm and welcoming. But the fact is, as of today, maybe tomorrow, the House is gone for a week. So in this critical period of time, when we're up against a July 1st deadline, when millions of American jobs are on the line, the House Republicans are leaving. And the Republican Majority Leader, Eric Cantor of Virginia, said it doesn't make any difference if we stay because we're not going to do anything significant. We are just going to politic and posture. How do you explain that to the families of all of these workers across America? Workers who need a job at a time when the economy is tough. People living paycheck to paycheck now have to, I guess, accept this furlough that the Majority Leader has announced for the rest of the year. There's important work to be done here, Mr. President, and it isn't just the transportation bill. The Majority Leader raised some questions and issues that still are pending between us. Let me also add another one to the list, cybersecurity. Cybersecurity. I saw a meeting, I guess it was about 2 months ago, that I've never seen since I've been in the Senate. We had a request by the administration, in fact it started with Senator Mikulski asking them for it, to ask all of the senators, Democrats and Republicans, to go to a classified setting, a secret setting, for a briefing on cybersecurity. There was a large turnout, Democrats and Republicans, and they spelled out to us the threat to the United States of America from China, Russia, other countries, and individual actors who are trying to invade our information technology to steal the secrets not only of our government but also of major companies, to burrow into our systems like the utilities of America and be prepared at a moment's notice to destroy the capacity of the U.S. economy or worse. We went through the exercise, and the exercise really spelled out for us what might happen. What might happen if there was cybersecurity attack into the United States and it literally turned out the lights in the great city of New York? What would happen? Well, it would take days before we could restore service, and in the process people would die, the economy would be crippled, and we are at risk of that happening. So the administration has produced a cybersecurity bill. to keep America safe from that kind of attack? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't meet Mr. Cantor's test. He's told us we can't do anything the rest of the year. All we can do is campaign, politic, give speeches. We have a responsibility as members of the Senate and the House to accept the challenges facing this nation. Number one, create the jobs, invigorate the economy, getting this country moving forward. Second, keeping America safe. I might say to Mr. Cantor from Virginia, take some time during your next recess, which is next week, and go over to the Central Intelligence Agency and sit down with them and talk about cybersecurity and the danger to the United States, and ask them if we can wait 6 months or a year to get back to this issue. I know what they're going to say. They're going to remind him that he swore to defend and uphold this great United States of America. And if he's going to do it, he's going to roll up his sleeves and go to work instead of coming up with another excuse for political campaigning and delay. This really comes down to the basic question. Eric Cantor, House Republican Majority Leader, has all but predicted that 2012, this year, is substantively over. We're finished. No more heavy lifting. It reminds me when I was a kid on the last day of school before summer vacation. Remember that? It's usually a half day. You couldn't wait to race out the front door, screaming and hollering and throwing things in every direction, jumping up and down with your buddies, saying, we're going to go swimming tomorrow, and get your bike out, we're going to go have some fun. It was 3 months at least of pure, unadulterated joy, no responsibility. Well, Majority Leader Cantor has announced that school's out for the House Republicans. They're finished for the year. But America isn't finished. Our agenda is still there. I want to commend the Senate Republicans who have joined us in passing this transportation bill, and I want to say to Speaker Boehner, when you return from the next recess next week, roll up your sleeves and get to work. Put 2.8 million Americans to work with this bipartisan transportation bill. Have the courage to bring it for a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives so we can put America to work and make certain they know that we take our jobs seriously. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, I rise.
The Senator from New York.
Madam President, I rise in support of the words of the Majority Leader and the Majority Whip. Many of us have been frustrated lately by the glacial pace of activity in the House of Representatives. The Senate is supposed to be the cooling saucer, but these days the House is where jobs bills and other important measures go to die. They are dragging out negotiations on a highway bill that would put millions to work. They refuse to even allow a conference on a bipartisan Violence Against Women's Act reauthorization, even though the Senate produced a bill with 68 votes. They have refused to act at all on a bipartisan bill that cracks down on China's unfair currency practices, something which their own party's nominee for president claims to support. Why the stalling? Well, we got our answer in the pages of Politico 2 days ago. Eric Cantor, who controls the floor schedule in the House, has decided to forego legislating in favor of politicking full-time. Despite all the major challenges that this Congress faces, despite the crisis of confidence that may hit our markets in the fall due to uncertainty over the looming fiscal cliff, Eric Cantor has declared a moratorium on any serious legislating until after the fall elections. The House of Representatives is like a computer that has been turned on sleep mode, and it doesn't plan to be rebooted until after November. This is a breathtaking admission by the number 2 Republican in the House. I wouldn't be surprised if Leader Cantor wishes he could take his statement back. It contradicts the rhetoric from many on his own side. Just last month, in a speech at the Peterson Institute, the Speaker of the House made a great show of calling on the administration and Congress to tackle tax cuts and the debt ceiling now, before the election. Here's what Speaker Boehner said. It's about time we roll up our sleeves and get to work. Unfortunately, Leader Cantor's comments seem to reflect House Republicans' true intentions more so than Speaker Boehner's quote. And that's a terrible shame. Leader Cantor and the House Republicans are shrinking from a potentially historic moment. I have a message for Leader Cantor. You may have abandoned any intention to legislate this year, but we will not bow to election year politics here in the Senate. The nation needs us, and we have too much to do. All around this chamber, there are green shoots of bipartisan activity. In the last 2 months alone, we have overhauled the postal system, approved a multi-year transportation program, renewed the Violence Against Women Act, streamlined drug approval rules at the FDA, renewed the Export-Import Bank, and passed a bill to help business startups. We've confirmed 20 judges and put the Federal Reserve Board at full strength for the first time in 6 years. And just this morning, we moved to proceed to a farm bill, the first overhaul of agriculture in 5 years, by an overwhelming 90-8 vote. Every one of the issues I mentioned had broad bipartisan support. Each wouldn't have been accomplished without bipartisan support. These are items, certainly, that are not the same as the big challenges that await us on taxes and spending, but they aren't trivial. They aren't post office namings either. They are real accomplishments. Quote, the Senate is on something of a roll, unquote, the New York Times recently reported. These accomplishments could very well prove to be the building blocks for bipartisan compromise on the bigger issues that await our nation. So the House may already have entered election mode, but, Mr. President, I dare say the Senate may be starting to gel at just the right time. In the Senate, there's a hunger to legislate. Republicans and Democrats alike in this chamber sense our nation is at a crossroads, and their first instinct is not to pause to contemplate its political implications, but to get things done. For this, I must salute the growing number of my colleagues across the aisle who are seeking to work across the aisle. Even as the loudest voices on the Republican side cite the President's defeat as their #1 goal, I believe there's a silent majority within the Republican caucus that yearns to come together and address the nation's problems free of bipartisan politics. Even after the extreme elements in their own party have claimed 2 of the most esteemed members of this body, one by retirement, one in a contentious primary, a silent majority of brave Republicans still dares to believe that compromise is a virtue, not a vice. My colleague from Tennessee, Senator Alexander, is a senator I admire. He has taken the lead in bringing members together to tackle the big issues that await us at the end of this calendar year. I was at a briefing this week organized by Senator Alexander, a Republican, and Senator Warner, a Democrat. Believe me, no one in that room thinks, as Leader Cantor apparently does, that these issues should be put off till the election. The conversations were quite preliminary for sure, but motivations of all the senators who attended were pure. Senator Coburn is another brave Republican. I may disagree with Tom Coburn on most issues and even on many of his tactics, but I admire the courage he displays on a daily basis by standing up to even the most powerful special interests in his party. He doesn't talk the talk about bucking his party's orthodoxy on revenues. He walks the walk. Just this morning, I watched him on one of the morning news soaps programs making great sense about the need for both parties to show leadership in confronting the big issues. He also made a point of saying that, unlike Leader Cantor, he doesn't believe these issues should wait till the election. My colleague from South Carolina, Senator Graham, is another such brave Republican. We have our differences on many issues, but he's a statesman, plain and simple. He's been quite vocal on his wish to overturn the defense cuts in the sequester. But while others in his party propose to replace these cuts on entirely their own terms, Senator Graham has bravely signaled an openness to make the trade-offs needed to help bridge the partisan divide. Asked by the New York Times recently about the potential for tapping revenues to replace some of the sequester cuts, Senator Graham bravely bucked his party's orthodoxy. Quote, "I've crossed the Rubicon on that one," he said. Be assured, Senator Graham is someone we can negotiate with. Senators Alexander, Coburn, and Graham are not alone. There are others who realize the need to act in a bipartisan fashion. Senator Alexander's colleague from Tennessee, Senator Corker, recently called out his own party for famously rejecting a deal, a hypothetical deficit deal, with 10-to-1 ratio of spending cuts to tax increases. Senators Isaacson and Collins said in the same Politico article that they, too, would be open to supporting a grand bargain that includes revenues as well as spending cuts. And my colleague from Oklahoma, Senator Inhofe, is featured in the pages of Roll Call today for his Herculean efforts to get House Republicans to be reasonable on a long-term highway bill, along with his colleague and our friend Senator Boxer. I suggest that the House Majority Leader reconsider his remarks to Politico and take a page from the book of these brave Republicans. The House may be in an all-politics mode, but the Senate is not done legislating, not by a long shot. And let's be honest, if the solution to these big issues is at all possible in the lame duck, or maybe even before the election, it's not going to come from the House, it's going to come out of the Senate. So, I suggest to Leader Cantor, Washington doesn't need an election to bridge our differences, it needs the Senate. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
The Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Madam President. I come today to talk, as my colleagues have discussed, about the fact that Republicans in the House of Representatives seem ready to pack it in for the year. Led by their majority leader and by the my way or highway philosophy that they have stuck to all year, they have signaled that they have given up on the work of the American people. From our yearly responsibility to pass appropriations bills, to legislation that would create thousands of good-paying construction jobs, to efforts to stop an impending student loan hike, to a bill that would protect vulnerable American women from violence. House Republicans have now indicated they'd rather kick the can down the road. It is really unfortunate that this is their attitude, not just for our college students or construction workers looking for jobs or women at risk, but it is statements like the one that the House Majority Leader made that make every American shake their head. And that's because as American families come together around their kitchen tables to make tough decisions about their mortgage or how to make tuition payments or even about how they're going to afford groceries, they want to see us coming together to make similarly tough decisions. But as Leader Reid and my other colleagues have made clear, it's tough to legislate from only one side of Capitol Hill. It's tough to address the issues affecting everyday Americans when House Republicans are more interested in drawing dividing lines than coming to the middle. It's pretty tough to create jobs and help our economy rebound when House Republicans are more focused on next year than on the bills that are stuck in their chamber today. And it is impossible to do anything about the looming fiscal cliff that we face when House Republicans continue to show they don't get it will take a balanced approach to fix. The bottom line is that we need a partner in legislating, and it appears from comments like those that were made this week that that hope is quickly fading. Madam President, what is particularly concerning about House Republicans wanting to shutter their chamber for the year is the fact that bipartisan, common sense Senate legislation is languishing there. Bills that have gotten support from overwhelming majorities and that were carefully crafted over months of negotiations are in limbo for no good reason. In fact, what I'd like to do today is highlight two important numbers to illustrate what I mean. First number, 68. 68. That is the number of senators that voted to pass a bipartisan, inclusive bill to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. It's a total that includes 15 Republican senators who, like the vast majority of Americans, agreed with us that we not only need to reaffirm our commitment to protect those at risk from domestic violence, but that we also need to improve and expand protections. 68 senators who came together to say that our commitment to saving the lives of victims of domestic violence should be above politics. 68 senators who said that we cannot allow partisan considerations to decide which victims we help and which we ignore. 68 senators that sent a strong bipartisan message to the House that we can come together to strengthen protections for all victims, regardless of where they live, or their race, or their religion, or gender, or sexual orientation. Unfortunately, it's a message that Republicans in the House have ignored. True to form, instead of taking up our bipartisan bill, Republicans have passed a bill that leaves out both the additional protections for vulnerable women and the delicate compromises that we achieved. And so when women across our country see the headlines that Leader Reid pointed out earlier, they know that their protections are at risk. And they are at risk not because the Senate can't come together, but because House Republicans refuse to join us. Madam President, the second number that I wanted to highlight today is 74. That is the number of senators that came together to send a bipartisan transportation jobs bill to the House. 74 senators who voted for a bill that will create or save millions of jobs in the country today. 74 senators who said that politics should not get in the way of our economic recovery or the need to fix our crumbling infrastructure. 74 senators who got behind a bill that was the product of intense and long negotiations between senators who we know don't often see eye to eye, but who did come together to pass a bill that could truly be called a compromise. Yet here we are, months after this bill was passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, and it too is now the subject of political games in the House. Another bill that should never be considered political has become part of their grandstanding routine. Madam President, it does not have to be this way. If Republicans can set aside politics and stand up to their Tea Party base, we can protect victims of domestic violence. We can pass a transportation bill. We can stop those tuition hikes. We can pass our appropriations bills. In fact, Madam President, we can even come together on the big issue that House Republicans have indicated they believe can only be resolved after an election. If Republicans are ready to admit that it will take a balanced and bipartisan deal to avoid that fiscal cliff, we could make a deal tomorrow. But on this issue, Republicans haven't just refused to meet us in the middle, they won't even come out of their corner. We all know a bipartisan deal is going to be required to include new revenue along with spending cuts. Unfortunately, Republicans are singularly focused on protecting the wealthiest Americans from paying a penny more in taxes. Madam President, Democrats are ready. We are willing to compromise. We know it's difficult. But we have to have a partner to do that. Republicans need to understand that the fiscal cliff is not simply going to disappear if they close their eyes and wish hard enough. We're going to have to act. And Republicans shouldn't let politics stop them from working with us now on a balanced and bipartisan deal middle-class families today expect and they deserve. Madam President, statements like the one made by the House Majority Leader only reaffirm what American families fear the most, that at a time when they deserve a government at their back, they're being abandoned. In the Senate, we have shown here that we can come together around bipartisan solutions, but we cannot do it alone. House Republicans need to send the American people a clear message. They are willing to be a partner in compromise. It's time for them to take up our bipartisan legislation to protect women and put workers back on the job. It's time to work with us in the appropriations process and to help our nation's students. It's time to realize that a solution to the impending fiscal cliff will require a balance. It is certainly not time to give up. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
The Majority Leader.
I appreciate very much the wonderful statements by Senator Durbin, Schumer, and Murray. We have a problem in this country based on what Cantor said. Here are the headlines. Congress switching from policy to politicking. All that we said here today has been based on fact, and that's too bad. It's too bad, Madam President, that we have somebody who's running the House of Representatives who's trying to kill these important pieces of legislation that Senator Schumer outlined that we have passed over here. We've passed all these things, worked very hard to get them done, and because of politicking and not policy, the Majority Leader of the House of Representatives is killing all this legislation for reasons that we all understand. Madam President, cloture has been invoked on motion to proceed to the Farm Bill by an overwhelming vote of 90 to 8. Senator Stabenow and Roberts are now, as we speak, working on an agreement on amendments to the bill, and I'm hopeful that they can make significant progress over the weekend. There will be no more roll call votes today. Monday at 5:30 we'll have a vote on Andrew Hurwitz to be a Ninth Circuit judge. I hope we can get the Farm Bill done next week and lock in the agreement on flood insurance, which is also vitally important to this country.
Madam President.
The Senator from Oregon.
Madam President, I came to the floor to talk about legislating, and I was struck, in fact, by some of the comments recently, because what I'm here to talk about is essentially the yeoman bipartisanship that we've seen with Senator Stabenow and Senator Roberts on the Farm Bill, and I'm going to talk about some specific ideas, each of which I believe could win bipartisan support and help strengthen the legislation as we go forward here in the Senate. Now, Madam President, I believe it's hard to overstate the importance of writing the best possible farm bill here in the Senate. When America desperately needs more jobs, and 1 in every 12 American jobs is tied to agriculture, this bill is an opportunity for the private sector to grow more jobs. When obesity rates are driving the American health care challenge, this bill can promote healthier eating without extra costs to taxpayers. When we're concerned about the threat to our treasured lands and air and water, this bill is our primary conservation program. When our rural communities are especially hard hit, and the President of the Senate knows about this because she's got a lot of rural country in her state, these rural communities are walking on an economic tightrope, and this bill can be a lifeline. Madam President, I spent much of last week in rural Oregon. In my state, Oregonians do a lot of things well. But what we do best is grow things, lots of things. Oregon grows more than 250 different crops, including everything from alfalfa seed to mint and blueberries. Several weeks ago, the Oregon Extension Service reported that agricultural sales in my home state increased more than 19% in 2011. Agriculture in Oregon is now more than a $5 billion industry annually, and much of this is driven by high prices for wheat and cattle and dairy products, fruits, vegetables, and other specialty crops. The fact is, agriculture is really the lodestar to prosperity for many rural Oregon communities, and nationwide there are many other towns in a similar position to the small communities I have the honor to represent here in the Senate. That's why, Madam President, and apropos of this talk about the need for bipartisanship, and Senator Schumer listed a number of these bipartisan areas, I consulted with the chair of the Agriculture Committee, Senator Stabenow, and the ranking minority member, Senator Roberts, Both of us served together here and also in the other body. And after getting their counsel, I selected 28 Oregonians from every corner of my state and across all types of agriculture to help serve as an advisory committee on ways to improve the economic opportunities for Oregon, specifically through this bill. And we had the good fortune to have the committee chaired by Ms. Carla Chambers, who owns a farm in the Willamette Valley, Stallbush Farms, and also Mike Thorne, a wheat farmer in eastern Oregon. And from the outset, this advisory committee didn't talk at all about politics, didn't talk about was there a Democratic way to write a farm bill or a Republican way to write a farm bill. What they did is they talked about the importance of the issues that I've just outlined: jobs, health care, conservation, rural communities. That's what they spent their time focused on, and particularly the jobs issue was central to their discussions. There are about 38,000 farms in my home state, which roughly support 234,000 jobs. That's about 11% of our state's employment. As much as 80% of the agricultural goods produced in Oregon are sold out of state. Half of that is exported to foreign countries. That was especially important to me, Madam President, because I also chair the Trade Subcommittee on the Senate Finance Committee. And so what I have taken as the centerpiece of my approach to agriculture and to our country's economy is we ought to do our very best to grow things here in the United States, to make things here in the United States, to add value to them in the United States, and then ship them somewhere. And it's especially important for Oregon agriculture, as I just noted, that 80% of our agricultural goods that are produced in our state are sold out of state. Now, abroad, our producers are doing very well. Nationally, each $1 billion in agricultural exports is tied to approximately 8,400 American jobs. These growing overseas markets represent a way to create and sustain good-paying jobs that rely on export sales. In fact, agriculture is one of the only sectors with a trade surplus, and in 2011 it boasted a surplus totaling $42.5 billion, the highest annual surplus on record. That's why, Madam President, I was honored to have a chance when Chairman Baucus was tied up in discussions with respect to the Supercommittee. He gave me the opportunity to manage a significant part of the debate on the recently passed 3 free trade agreements, which again give us a chance, as I've indicated, to build on that proposition that I've outlined here, where we grow things here, add value to them here, and then ship them somewhere else. Nothing says more than giving those opportunities to producers from Oregon to Florida. They sell their fruits and vegetables, their wheat, their beef, their nursery crops, and other high-value products at home and abroad. The Farm Bill continues those programs that American producers rely on to help market their goods in foreign markets. I think it's important, again, to stress the bipartisanship associated with making sure there are bountiful opportunities for American agriculture and particularly for Oregon agricultural goods. The second area that my Agriculture Advisory Committee focused on, Madam President, was stressing the importance of healthy nutrition here at home. And of course, the USDA, our Department of Agriculture, has recommended 5 fresh fruits and vegetables for Americans daily in our country. So what that means is that from Burns, Oregon to Bangor, Maine, farm programs need to make it easier for those with low incomes to be able to eat healthier. And there never ought to be a trade-off between promoting good health and affordable food. And so I think we've got to look at some fresh approaches Madam President, to promote healthy nutrition here in this country, and I believe that it is not just an economic threat to our country, it is also a national security threat to our nation, Madam President, because we have seen, regrettably, the many Americans who would like to wear the uniform of the United States, patriots who have not been able to pass the health exams, the physicals necessary to serve in our military. In the past 3 decades, obesity rates have quadrupled for children ages 6 to 11. More than 40% of Americans are expected to be obese by 2030. The Center for Disease Control reports that in 2008 alone, the United States spent $147 billion on medical care related to obesity. Obesity is the top medical reason 1 in 4 young people cannot, as I've indicated, join the military, and it has been identified as a threat to national security by the Department of Defense. Madam President, it doesn't have to be this way, and I want to outline some specific ideas for changing that to promote good health in our country without adding extra costs to taxpayers. One opportunity for change, Madam President, is through the Farm to School program. Again, without costing taxpayers additional money, it ought to be easier for delicious pears and cherries and other healthy produce grown just a few miles down the road to make it into our schools. And again, this ought to be a national approach. Schools from Springfield, Oregon to Savannah, Georgia currently purchase their fruits and vegetables from USDA, these are Department of Agriculture warehouses, which may be hundreds of miles away. Many of our farmers and our producers would like to sell their goods to local schools, and many schools would like to source their products locally. The Farm Bill ought to promote that. When I was in Oregon last week, I had a chance to meet with the management of Harry and David. They're a major employer in my state, an Oregon pear producer, and they told me they want to sell their fruit to schools down the street, but instead a complex maze of federal rules and regulations has been a hassle. I mean, pretty much described something that sounded like bureaucratic water torture. So I'm going to offer an amendment, Madam President, that would make it less of a hassle for producers such as Harry and David and farmers to sell directly to local schools, all without spending additional federal dollars. A second opportunity to improve our nation's health, Madam President, lies with the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is better known as food stamps. The program currently spends over $70 billion a year. This is the big expenditure in the Farm Bill, Madam President, and there is no way to really determine whether it promotes good nutrition. So, Madam President and colleagues, think of all the possibilities for helping our country, all the possible benefits, if the SNAP program did more to improve nutritional outcomes for those who use the program. Let me make clear, I am not for cutting benefits. I understand the crucial lifeline this program provides for millions of our people. What I am interested in doing is seeing that through that $70 billion, it's possible to wring more value for good nutrition and improving nutritional outcomes out of that enormous expenditure. And one of the ways that we can do it would be to allow states to obtain a waiver from the SNAP program when they brought their farmers, their retailers, their health specialists, and those who use the program personally, if they came together and said, we've got a consensus for improving the nutritional outcomes in our state for those on the food stamp program, the SNAP program, they ought to be able to get a waiver in order to do that and help us produce more good health in America. Madam President, that's not some kind of national nanny program. That's not telling people you can only eat this or you can only eat that. That's just common sense to have farmers, retailers, those on the program, health specialists, look, for example, to try to create some voluntary incentives to promote better nutrition with this enormous sum that is spent on the SNAP program, and I intend to offer an amendment to do that. A third opportunity for improvement, Madam President, is through what's known as the gleaning program. Historically, gleaners gathered leftover produce from the fields, but today gleaners play a crucial role in reducing the staggering amount of food that goes to waste each year. At a time when food waste is the single largest category of waste in our local landfills, more than 34 million tons of food. Again, without spending extra taxpayer money, we can do more to ensure that this unwanted food is used to tackle hunger in America. Led by the dedicated work of local food banks, many are striving to put America's food bounty to better use. In Portland, Oregon, a wonderful nonprofit organization run by Tracy Osrin is known as Urban Gleaners, and they are poised to collect surplus food, hundreds of thousands of pounds of food, from grocers and restaurants and parties and all kinds of social organizations, and they redistribute those hundreds of thousands of pounds of food to organizations that serve the hungry. Urban Gleaners is doing great work, but they could be doing a lot more, Madam President. So again, without spending a dime of extra money, we can advocate for gleaners all across America, Madam President, by making it possible under the micro loan program. If you're trying to set up a gleaning program in a small town and you have to borrow, say, $20,000 to start a refrigeration program to preserve the quality of the food, let's make it possible for the gleaners to be part of the micro loan program. I'm not proposing, Madam President, and I've discussed this with the chair of the committee, Senator Stabenow, and Senator Roberts, the ranking minority member. I'm not proposing allocating one additional dime to the program. I think it's a fine program. I simply want to say that when you have gleaners in our country who are telling us about the enormous amount of food that is still wasted despite their tremendous efforts, let's not pass up an opportunity to, with this bill, make it possible to promote gleaning in our country. Now, next, Madam President, to produce the healthy food needed to feed America, we need fertile agriculture, and conservation plays a central role in that. Roughly 28% of Oregon's land mass is devoted to agricultural production. Maintaining this land is crucial for our productivity. For more than half a century, the Farm Bill has supported infrastructure modernization and conservation projects. They give, once again, the opportunity for collaboration, and that's key to our natural resources. I see my friend from Arizona, Senator McCain, here. We talked about doing this in the forestry area years ago. We ought to be promoting collaborative projects to boost rural economies. It's the Oregon way, and we ought to build on that in this Farm Bill as well. The time is also ripe to promote farmers markets and locally grown food, which will lead to greater awareness of local markets, roadside stands, and community-supported agriculture. This Farm Bill expands those opportunities, And I think, once again, these types of local initiatives give us the opportunity to change the trajectory, the tragic and staggering trajectory of obesity in this country, and to ensure the viability of these programs. The land required to produce nutritious foods must be addressed. I plan to offer, Madam President, as I've indicated in these comments, a number of amendments to the Farm Bill, each of which I have discussed with the chair of the committee, Senator Stabenow and Senator Roberts. The Farm to School amendment that I'll offer would not spend additional taxpayer money, but would make it easier for schools to purchase locally for the breakfast, lunches, and snacks that they serve children. My second amendment, to allow states across this country to get a waiver under the SNAP program, under the food stamp program, so they can consult with their farmers, their retailers, their health specialists, those who are on the program, who use it, and try to come up with a way to get more good health and nutrition out of the $70 billion that's spent on the program. They ought to have an opportunity to do that so that the SNAP program can be a launch pad for healthier eating rather than just a conveyor belt for calories. With a waiver, states with innovation and effective ideas could improve nutritional outcomes and put their good ideas into action. Third, I intend to offer that amendment, again, that does not spend additional taxpayer money, to promote gleaning through the micro loan program. And finally, Madam President, based on the recommendations of the Institute of Medicine, I will offer an amendment, again one that does not cost money, to make it possible to advance some of the recommendations of the Institute of Medicine to look at the relationship between agriculture policy, the diet of the average American, and how we can reduce.
Will the Senator yield for a question? How much time
I'm about 1 minute away.
I thank the Senator.
I thank my colleagues.